Washington Journal continues.
We're talking about the impact of teaching of evolution based on the case, the 1968 Supreme Court. First off, joining me to my left is Reverend Barry Lynn of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and Edward Sisson, who is an intelligent design attorney. Mr. Sisson, tell us, what's the difference between intelligent design and the various different sort of names that it's come through the last couple of decades: creation science, evolutionary biology, now intelligent design? What is that, and why does it keep coming up in front of the courts?
Well, I disagree with Reverend Lynn as to his characterization of intelligent design as simply being creation science. The way I came to the issue was by reading the science, I got interested in the scientific criticisms of Darwinism. And as I got into the issue, I discovered there certainly are many religious people who seize on those criticisms and say, aha, I have a means of pursuing religious doctrines here. And Reverend Lynn's organization and many, many others have done a great job of trying to blur the distinctions between the legitimate scientific questions and the way in which religiously motivated and frankly not very well informed groups such as the Dover School Board have tried to adopt a theory or an issue that they don't really understand and have turned it into a religious doctrine, whereas there are very valid scientific criticisms which, as a result of this sociological battle in America, never get addressed.
So just tell us, you know, for the sake of this discussion, what is intelligent design?
Well, as I see it, many people apply their own definitions. It is the conclusion you come to when you examine the molecular biology of the cells of which we are all made. And you see such interlocking mechanical complexity in the way that cells operate, both individually and in multicellular creatures such as ourselves, that it becomes extremely implausible to say, oh, well, it all happened through the known processes of chemical interactions, mutations, and then exposure of the new features to the environment where natural selection can operate. But I would respond to what Reverend Lynn said. In his prior comment, he said that creatures have a certain genetic characteristic and then natural selection operates on it. The key to me for intelligent design is, how did it get that genetic characteristic? The prior caller pointed out that Darwin has been superseded. Darwin had a theory as to how animals get their genetic characteristics. It was called the gemule theory. And he had, I don't need to go into the details of it, but it is totally wrong. Now, for his time, it was a legitimate scientific theory, but it turned out to be wrong. And instead, with the discovery of DNA, we now have a much better understanding of how creatures have genetic characteristics. That's why we call it a genetic characteristic. And so the issue is, how does new information get into that code? And that is the key area, and that has not been shown with any convincing clarity. And the Human Genome Project is looking at the code as we have it today, but it isn't really telling us very much about how it came to be. It's like looking at a book and saying, well, here's what was written, but how it got written is a different story. The founding partners at my former law firm, and his law clerk on the Supreme Court at the time, Peter Zimroth, is currently a partner at my former law firm. So I have some exposure to the case.
Okay.
The key,
full disclosure.
The key element, in my opinion, is that the court, 7 justices, said that if a law bars the teaching of, and the phrase was a segment of the body of knowledge, is the phrase that's used, bars the teaching of a segment of the body of knowledge because to teach it might cause the students to lose their belief in some religious doctrine, you cannot bar the teaching of that segment of knowledge. And so in my opinion, I hope Reverend Lynn agrees, that was the key element of the case. And what's interesting today, we have these statutes that a number of states are considering called the academic freedom statutes. And the question is, if the body of knowledge includes doubts and criticisms and concerns about how new genetic information gets into the DNA code, that teaching cannot be suppressed under Epperson v. Arkansas merely because to teach it may help cause people to believe in religious doctrines.
We're talking about two spheres. We ought to talk about them in different ways. They have different measures of success and of evidence, and we shouldn't mix up the two. It doesn't do either one any good. Talking about.
Well, I would have to disagree on the, again, you know, you're always saying, well, leaping to a God as the designer or some discrete kind of being. And that's not necessarily the case at all. The fact that we see what we best analogize or understand as intelligence doesn't necessarily mean that we then have to flip over and say, well, it was the aliens that are in the latest Indiana Jones movie. Certainly there are many people who jump in and say, aha, this is my God. But what they do and say doesn't change the rational analysis of an independent mind looking at this data.
But what is the intelligence?
We don't know yet. And part of the problem is that all funding, I mean, anyone who even indicates that they question the theory is ridiculed and sneered at, spoken to in harsh terms, mischaracterized, as you have just done today, and always do, as far as I can tell. And so the idea that there's free inquiry in the scientific community or in the community as a whole is disproven by this repressive behavior. And so if somebody says, well, I would like to design some experiments and develop and maybe see if there's a way of answering your concerns, you're told, it's all nonsense, no funding for you. It's like the soup Nazi, no soup for you, no funding for you. And so you get nowhere. And then you say, well, where's your peer-reviewed science? When you say, well, the first guy that authorized a peer-reviewed journal article, Richard von Sternberg, associated with the Smithsonian, was smeared and slandered for merely being the editor. And so all of these complaints that it hasn't been developed, you've produced the situation that prevents its development.
Let me ask you this. In the philosophy of intelligent design, who is the designer? If it's not God, then who would design?
Oh, I don't believe, certainly I don't have an answer. I don't know that anyone does, really. Certainly there are many people that say, oh, well, it's my God. In my personal opinion, the data doesn't support that. I am a Christian, but I mean, I hardly ever go to church. And it's not the driving force for me. And to me, it's terribly frustrating. I see what's potentially a fascinating scientific area to explore. You know, how could we characterize the operation of intelligence? Is it something, you know, can you look into I mean, the string theory talks about multi-dimensions, 14 dimensions or something. Is there some interaction there that's possible? But it all is suppressed because of the fight here to keep the religiously motivated people from having a greater say in public education. And so they get squelched. And I think that the Epperson v. Arkansas case is very supportive for the intelligent design position, provided that what the teacher wishes to teach is actually found in the science textbooks. And what I've been saying for years is the leading intelligent design textbook is Molecular Biology of the Cell, 4th edition, which I read almost all of to prepare to cross-examine mainstream scientists in the Kansas evolution hearings, and they all boycotted. They won't sit for questioning. You just can't get a hold anywhere to try to develop what is a fascinating potential scientific area that's being squelched.